Tonight, I'd like to begin a conversation about Israel. I'll tell you right off the bat, I'm sure, tonight, I'll disappoint you, or I'll frustrate you. I know that I will leave out ideas that are important, and ideas that might have been what you were hoping to hear tonight. I know I will not get it all right. And as my colleague, Rabbi Rachel Ackerman, said to her community on Rosh Hashanah, I can't possibly speak words that will resonate with all of you, but I will earnestly try to reach each of your hearts by opening up my own. So, I'll ask, when I say something you disagree with, please stay at the table. Stay in community and stay in conversation. Tonight, let's begin. And as I did on Rosh Hashanah, tonight I want to tell you something about you and something about me. First, you. First, us. As we sit here this night of Kol Nidrei, reflecting on what was and yearning for what will be, I know that so many of us are feeling broken. I know it because I read every single word on each green, blue, and yellow slip of the soul papers. I know it because I've seen your eyes and felt your spirits over this past year. We are feeling so broken. We're still feeling the trauma of October 7th. The shock and horror of the brutality of that day has not waned over the past year. We're saddened, dismayed by the human toll and destruction in Gaza. We're shattered as we hear Rachel Goldberg-Polin and John Goldberg talk about Hirsch of blessed memory, and cannot understand why there isn't the political will or moral courage to bring the hostages home. We're afraid and angry about the dramatic rise in anti-Semitism across the country, and particularly on college campuses. We feel abandoned by partners and the global community. We feel unsure about how to talk to work colleagues and friends. We feel distanced from family with whom we can't agree. As we sit here this night of Kol Nidrei, we are feeling broken. And I don't have any answers. I wish I did. I don't know how to fix it or how to make it better. But what I do know is that the synagogue can hold our sorrow and it can withstand our anger. What I do know is that we need each other. We need the ones with whom we agree to give us strength, and we need the ones with whom we disagree to broaden our understanding. And we need the vast majority of us who are stuck somewhere in the middle. Not overly sure or overly confident, struggling to see with clarity this murky and impossible moment. People who, as Rabbi Aaron Brusso wrote over Passover, have no camp among the encampments. In truth, except for two people in this room, that's where everyone sits. Except for two of you who sit on the poles, everyone else in this room has someone to the right or to the left of them. And part of our job, our sacred obligation, is to learn how to be in conversation and to share our stories. I want us to practice speaking to each other, even and especially when we disagree. Our people has a long and cherished history of disagreement. The pinnacle of Jewish argument comes from the sages Hillel and Shammai, who lived in the 1st century BCE. They and their disciples disagreed about everything. And there was a time when they had a 3-year disagreement. And after 3 years of argument, a heavenly voice appeared. It said, Eilu ve'elu divrei Elohim chayim. These and those are the words of the living God. Both of you are right. Both of you have truth. And, the voice goes on, Hillel wins the argument. Why? Not because he was smarter, and not because he was a better debater, and not because he had better memes or signs or tweets. He won the argument because when Hillel teaches, he recognizes Shammai's truth. He teaches the wisdom of Shammai alongside his own teaching. He is patient, gracious, forbearing. And in turn, we inherit a legacy of sacred disagreement, one where we are brave enough to see what truth another might hold and share it alongside our own truth. We don't have to agree on the outcome, but we can recognize and validate the deeply held emotions and beliefs of our fellow without castigating and dismissing them. The teachings of Hillel and Shammai continue, and they are desperately instructive for where we sit right now as a Jewish community. They disagreed about everything. And despite their disagreement, they ate at each other's tables, and their children married each other. And even when they believed the other to be violating God's sacred instructions, they still ate each other's brisket. They refused. They refused to allow disagreement to dismantle community. You might be saying, Rabbi, but what about the extremists on college campuses that gleefully foment anti-Semitism? Or you might say, what about the other extremists in the Israeli government whose rhetoric is distressingly jingoist and racist? And for right now, I'm not talking about them. Not because they aren't important, or because the risks they pose are not real and serious, but because on this night of Kol Nidrei, here at Congregation Kol Ami, I want to talk about us, and I want to talk about you. I want to talk about the real people you talk to on a day-to-day basis, but relationships that have frayed or distanced because of October 7th and its aftermath in the Middle East and in American politics, discourse, and culture. For some, that will mean being brave enough to leave our echo chambers and be in conversation as Hillel would be, with grace and patience and forbearance. For others, it might mean being brave enough to share, perhaps for the first time, knowing that we don't know everything, knowing that there may be those who disagree, and with the shared commitment to being in community, searching not to win, but to find more truth. Because as a community, we hold a range of opinions and feelings about the past year. With thanks to the many of you who responded over the last month to the One Question Israel survey that we sent, that asked you to share about your relationship to Israel, let me share some of what you wrote. For some, October 7th and the global response, or lack thereof, strengthened their Jewish resolve. Some expressed support of Netanyahu and the need to eradicate Hamas, cheering each IDF assault and each Hamas defeat. Some described losing their sense of sympathy. Shock, fear, and anger about protests on college campuses, and resolute to rally around Israel against those who would seek its demise. Rising anti-Semitism across the globe, reinforcing the need for Israel as a safe haven in a world all too comfortable with the death of Jews. There's truth here. Others described something different. The excesses of violence in Gaza, they wrote, were horrifying to them. That the Jewish state could behave in such a way had them questioning their own Judaism. wondering if they could ever be a part of a Jewish community, not out of animus towards Israel, but dismayed by the actions of the state, seeking space for hard moral conversation and finding none. Others were hurt by the painful insinuation that their criticism meant they were not sufficiently sympathetic with Jewish suffering, and therefore were painted outside of the community. There's truth here too. And most of you were somewhere in the middle, pulled by compassion for Palestinian suffering and not wanting to risk the safety and security of Israelis, yearning for an Israel that lives its highest ideals and saddened by corruption and selfish leadership, desperate for peace, but not knowing the path to get there, not knowing who to talk to, feeling insufficiently knowledgeable to weigh in, and feeling obligated to speak up and worrying that what they might say would distance, alienate, or hurt people they care about. There's truth here too. And you might find yourself in one of these places. Eilu, ve'eilu, ve'eilu. If we're willing, we can see truth in the conviction, righteous anger, pain, and sorrow that each of us is feeling. If we're willing, we can live like Hillel and Shammai, willing to sustain disagreement because of our commitment to community and to each other. Back in 2018, Rabbi Shira wrote an op-ed in the Jewish Week. She wrote, "We cannot afford to be divided amongst ourselves. We need to find a way to listen to each other and hopefully learn from each other, at least at these centers of Jewish life. The future of the American Jewish community depends on it. The future of Israel depends on it." So how do we get there? It's not by speaking out of positions, talking points, data, and slogans. We get there by talking to each other. We talk about where we've come from and the values and the ideals that matter to us. We get there by sharing our stories. And I promised at the start that I would tell you a little bit about me. So as we begin this conversation tonight, let me tell you some of my stories and some of the moments that shape how I see, love, and understand the land, people, and the state of Israel. My first real memory related to Israel came when I was in 5th grade. I was working on a Sunday school project with my friend Zach. On a large poster board, we had to design our own kibbutz. Of course, ours had a chocolate fountain in the middle. And the only other detail that I remember is that we named one of the roads Yitzchak Rabin Way. A year earlier, Rabin had been assassinated. I didn't know much, but I knew that he tried to make peace, and because of that, someone killed him. At that point, I didn't know that it was a Jewish extremist. I knew only vaguely about the violence of the First Intifada. All I really knew was that the prime minister who wanted peace was assassinated. My first memory of Israel is a yearning and a hope for elusive peace that neither side had the real will to make happen. What about you? What are your first memories? What are the core memories that define and shape your understanding of Israel? A second story from my time at Brandeis University. Go Judges. I was deeply involved in Jewish life, which I'm sure you are surprised to hear. But when it came to Israel, there was a group over here and a group over here, and they shouted at each other. And I didn't want to shout. I didn't want to pledge allegiance to a particular ideology. I wanted to ask questions. I wanted to learn. And I felt like there was no place for that, so I just disconnected. I maintained a loose care and affinity for Israel, but mostly I disengaged because there was no place for me. This second moment is a time when forced dichotomy and animus in a community that I cared about left me feeling like I had no safe intellectual or emotional space to ask questions, be vulnerable, unsure, or curious. One last story. The second time I ever went to Israel was to live there for a year and to begin my rabbinical studies. It also happened to be my first year of marriage, and I loved it. I loved the language and the food. I loved traveling and exploring. I loved feeling like I was a part of something Jewish and part of something bigger than me. I loved time with family and friends who lived in and built the state. Surely there were hard moments too. But most of all, I loved the learning. One day a week, we had Israel seminar, where we studied and explored Israeli history, culture, politics, and identity. I didn't learn what to believe, but I did learn how to listen and listen deeply. And when I came back to the States, and it was time to talk about conflict or politics, I found myself in an odd place. When I spoke to someone who leaned left, I pulled right. When I spoke to someone who leaned right, I pulled left. I challenged, hopefully graciously, leaders of AIPAC, and I challenged, hopefully graciously, leaders of Encounter who took us to Palestinian villages in the West Bank. I wanted a middle ground. I wanted more nuance and more complexity. And that remains what I want. Lately, some of you have asked me, so, Rabbi, what's your position? And truth be told, I don't have one. I don't have a position or broad policy pronouncements. I'm a little worried. I'm worried that we're entering this social moment where everyone needs to have their take. And then we compare this take and that take, argue about them, brand the people who hold them so we can argue and tweet and define ourselves into opposing camps. I don't have a position. I'm a rabbi. And what I do have is a hashkafat olam, a worldview. I have a spiritual framework through which I see the world and try to understand the unexplainable. It's rooted in the multiple truths of Hillel and Shammai, of trying with my whole heart to hear truth and invite us into nuance and complexity and to explore with compassion, patience, grace, and forbearance. In rabbinical school, they teach you a bunch of funny Latin words that no one understands. So let me inflict one of those upon you tonight. The word is merism, M-E-R-I-S-M. A merism is when you take two contrasting parts to refer to the whole. Two classic examples, day and night. Day and night does not exclude mid-morning or afternoon, it means the whole day. Another, young and old. Doesn't exclude young adults or the middle-aged. Young and old means everyone. So let me share with you some of my Israel merisms. Two contrasting ideas that held together offer me a more complete, albeit more complicated whole. First, particularism and universalism. I'm a particularist. I have a special care and affinity for the Jewish people. And I'm a universalist. I believe that we have a responsibility to be an or legoyim, a light unto the nations, and care for all peoples no matter their background. To be a Jew is to have a particular responsibility to universalism and a responsibility to attend to the needs of the Jewish people. A second, Israel as special and Israel as ordinary. As a Jew, I think Israel is extraordinary. And because of that, I hold it to a higher moral standard than I do other states. I do not expect it to behave as other nations of the world. I want it to be a paradigm of morality, justice, and light. And I find it deeply troubling and unreasonable that the rest of the world holds Israel to an unfairly high standard, with specifically reserved critiques that lambast the Jewish state. A third, security and justice. I'm quick to criticize Netanyahu and his ultra-right-wing government for their eagerness toward war and violence and their unwillingness to yield. And I know that there's no partner on the other side willing to lead. And I know that there is great moral hazard in violence and subjugation. And I know that the security of Israelis depends on disarming and dismantling terror organizations. A fourth, victory and compromise. I know that Hamas and Hezbollah need to be defeated, but I don't know what defeat means. I know that there has been too much death and too much destruction, and that violence will only beget more violence. I know that we need to find peace. And I know that it is impossible to agree to peace with a knife at your throat. A fifth, bring them home. In America, for most of this year, bring them home was the chant on one side of the street, while on the other, they chanted, ceasefire now. Bring them home remains a desperate cry for the hostages and for the world to see the humanity of Jewish people and recognize our suffering. And when we went on our congregational solidarity mission to Israel in June, Bring Them Home had a different tone. There, on the streets of Tel Aviv and Jerusalem, Bring Them Home was the language of protest against the government, a demand for a ceasefire agreement. Almost jarring to see the same words and posters for an opposite message. Eilu ve'Eilu, both have truth. And I don't know the answer. But I do know that we can find and experience more truth together. The crisis on college campuses, I think, gives the sense that we need to tighten ranks. We can't give an inch lest we lose hearts and minds and critical aid to support Israel's defense and security. But here we need to be in deep, rigorous, intellectual and emotional conversation. We need conversation like Hillel and Shammai, with dignity and curiosity. And when we disagree, we cannot get up from the table. I'm sure tonight that I disappointed you or I frustrated you. I know I left out ideas that are important and words that you were hoping to hear tonight. I know I did not get it all right. So please, talk to me. Talk to each other. Join for our I Engage study group. Join us for bagels on Sundays, or with patience, grace, and extra forbearance with a brownie in your hand, have a chat at Oneg. Remain at the table, and together we'll find our truths. I know this year has been hard on all of us, wherever we sit. We are lonely and sad and tired. We are angry, numb, and brokenhearted. We're all of these things. And we're the contrasts, and we're everything in between. This year, let's see and hold each other's truths. Let's learn and let's grow from each other. Let's expand our compassion and our understanding, and let's walk together on a path toward peace. Gemar Chatima Tova.
הרופא לי שורי לב ומכבש לעצבותם מונה מספר לכוכבים לכולם שמות יקרא הרופא לי שורי לב ומכבש לעצבותם מונה מספר לכוכבים לכולם שמות יקרא Healer of the broken-hearted, binder of their wounds, counter of uncountable stars, you know where they are. Healer of the broken-hearted, binder of our wounds, counter of uncountable stars, you know who we are.